Hey guys, CVH here with BetweenTheLanes.net, and today I'll be going over a deck that I've been streaming a lot recently. Got a couple requests on YouTube for the deck list and the deck tech, so that's what today's video is. It's going to be Sorcerer Control. I guess you could also call it Ramp. It's sort of like a ramp control deck. So originally I got the list that I basically copied to check out Sorcerer Control and the new meta from a streamer named Scissor. Good streamer, I suggest you check him out. I'll link his Twitter and his Twitch below. So check out Scissor, and I changed a few cards from this. I don't remember the exact list that I copied. I'm sure he changed it a bit too, but this is the list I wound up with to take advantage, just like the Ram Scout list I posted recently. Take advantage of the new Hisgrove card and get to 15, make some Swamp Leviathans, and call it a day. So this deck is not like the Ward midrange that I posted a month or so back. This is a much slower deck, aiming to drag out the game as long as possible. And the ward cards it uses, like the Daggerfalls and Emmerich, are mostly for their utility, not just for the whole ward package. Alright, so without further ado, this is the list. I'll get right into the card choices. There's an Odiving at the bottom. If you're just looking for the screenshot, that's the entire list with an Odiving. So let's describe some of the card choices and why they're in there. As usual, at the lower end of the curve, things are pretty self-explanatory. Firebolt, good removal. Shrieking Harpy, good prophecy. We're trying to stall the game. Wardcrafter and Windcube Spellsword, they're both ward cards, but that mostly just helps us trade very effectively in the early game. Windcube Spellsword is one of the best 2-drops in the game at trading early. Wardcrafter is good early, except against Murkwater Witch, and it's a very good late game card to give your guards, such as Nogleave and Preserver of the Root Ward, make them very hard to deal with for most aggressive strategies. Crushing Blow and the Lightning Bolts are just good removal. Don't really need to talk about those. Daggerfall, it's like Windcube Spellsword in the fact that it can trade pretty decently, better than a Telvanni Arcanist, for example, would be able to, because it just has the ward. The Tome of Alteration allows you to cycle in the late game and trade up with slightly larger threats. The reason Scissor said he included 3 copies in the original version was because of the 3 copies of Venom Tongue. Occasionally this card is weak to things like Murkwater Witch that bring it down to 0 attack power, and if you can't attack with it, well, if you can't deal damage to it, the lethal's not going to go off, and you're not going to be able to gain the max magicka. So in order to give that card a little bit more stability, we have the Tomes of Alteration, which will give it +2/+2 and enable it to attack again. So that's one thing. In general, though, Venom Tongue is still kind of an inconsistent ramp card because it does need to sit for a turn before it can make an attack, whereas Treeminder and even Hisgrove get the ramp immediately, which can be relevant. As I mentioned in the Ram Scout deck, you don't really want to be playing this before you're getting the Swamp Leviathans in a lot of matchups, especially when you know they're playing Purple Endurance and could play something like Shadowfen Priest to destroy your support and basically have no value except for the Magicka ramp. So it is important to have some consistent ramp cards. You could play more Treeminders, that's a consideration. This isn't like a final build, but so far this has been pretty okay for me. I do suggest experimentation though. I haven't played this deck a ton, just a few days on stream. I'm all about those larger sample sizes. So Mummify, just a solid removal card. I don't think this was in the original list, but I felt like I needed one more way to deal with a larger threat. Since we don't have Willpower, we don't have Manticora or Piercing Javelin, and that's a pretty huge loss. So while I'm not a huge fan of Mummify as a multiple copy card, because it can get very clunky pretty quickly, having the 1-of has been pretty good for me. Elusive Schemer, best cycle in the game, fantastic for any control deck that can run blue, so we're playing 3 of those. Preserver of the Root, like I mentioned in the video about epics, fantastic in any deck with endurance that wants to go into the late game. This deck definitely does, so it runs 3 Preserver of the Roots, 3 Shadowfen Priest, great sorry, Jet's flying by. It's not a silent, it's a silence, it's not a cycle. So great silence card, with the versatility of destroying supports. People are still playing a ton of Divine Fervors out there, and you can really get 1-up on anyone who decides to play Hisgrove early. If they're just taking a risk and they're saying, alright, I don't think my opponent has a Shadowfen Priest in hand, I'll just use it for the Magicka ramp and just hope it survives a turn, because I have 3 Magicka sitting around and I might as well play the Hisgrove. Anyone who does that, if you hold a Shadowfen Priest against a deck that you're pretty certain is playing Hisgrove, if they play it prematurely at all, you can just definitely pull one over on them, and that takes away effectively 16/16 of stats that they would have been able to play for free in a couple turns. So if the game is going late, this is something you probably want to hold on to for the Hisgroves. Emmerich, it's not really a ward deck, but this card is just basically too good not to play in Sorcerer, I think. It's so fantastic. Worst case, 6-drop, 5/5 that's dealing 2 damage to something. Could be a creature, could be their face if you really need to. And it has ward, so it's going to trade very efficiently as well. It's not even uncommon in this deck because you have the Ward Crafters, the Spell Swords, and the Daggerfall for it to deal a ton of damage, much like the Ward midrange that I've posted, where I got as high as a 10 damage Emmerich on summon, and that's just absurd. If it can ever get that high, you're pretty much going to win the game just off of this card's value alone. Ice Storm, fantastic sweeper for any control deck, don't really need to explain it. Night Shadow I am running 3 of because I'm not playing Restless Templar, which is the other main way to be able to heal in these colors. Let's find the Templar here. That's another consideration. I do like the Night Shadows though. I felt like when I was playing this deck, the metagame was a little bit slower than it had been previously. A lot of ramp scouts, a lot of control mage, so I didn't really need the slightly faster heal. Night Shadow's another threat. In the higher threat density of your deck, the more trouble it's going to be for your control mage to deal with all of them, because in the late game you do eventually have to kill your opponent. You can stall as much as you want, but against another control deck, you want to be the person putting the last threat on board and killing your opponent with it. Nahagleave, great against control decks because it can't be targeted with actions, and great against aggro decks because it's a giant guard that can't be targeted with actions, so fantastic for control decks with Endurance. Don't see a reason why you wouldn't play it. Blood Magic Lord, a card I was running 3 of in the scout ramp, but I decided I didn't want 3 in this deck. Just got a little bit too clunky for a deck without like Thornhist Mage, a little bit less consistent ramp. This card is still one of the better ways to close out a game though in the late game against other control decks. As I mentioned, obviously the Blood Magic spells are fantastic cards. Not Green and Odiving, this sort of package, they're both great cards for control decks. Again, I don't really need to talk about these because you see these in every control deck that can be running them. Besides the obvious turn 9 Elixir into Not Green into Odiving to clear a board way sooner than you would otherwise be able to. They're both just really good standalone cards if you're going to the late game, some of the best things you can be doing with your Magicka, since you'll have a lot of it, so you might as well use it to play the most threatening cards possible and getting some good value out of them. That's pretty much the list. If you've seen me play it on stream, then you'll know that I've had some upswings with it, some downswings with it. I've posted a couple videos, if you haven't checked those out, of highlights with the deck before this. The last 2, I believe, were highlights from streams of me playing Sorcerer Control. Still experimenting with the deck. Don't think I've played quite as many games as I should to know exactly if this is like the final build. I'm sure there's changes to make. So if you want to check this out and then like experiment with it, this is probably a jumping off point. So I do recommend it if you're looking for one of those late game decks, but you don't really want to, you want to break the mold. You don't really want to play Control Mage or Ramp Scout because there's just too many of those. So, you know, be your own person, play Sorcerer Control. And I also recommend checking out Scissor's stream and his Twitter as well. Mostly his Twitch is where he streams a lot. So he's been playing this deck. He gave me the original version basically. I saw it on Legends decks. So good deck builder, and maybe he'll have some advice for the deck as well. If you've enjoyed the deck tech, be sure to follow the YouTube channel for more content. Follow Between the Lanes for more strategy articles. And make sure to click subscribe if you're interested. And I'll see you next time, guys.